Good afternoon. My name is Elva Mason, and I'm so delighted to be here to see people that I haven't seen, some in 20 years. I am, as they say, the new kid on the block, one of the new board members, and incredibly honored and privileged to be on this board of wonderful women leaders. When I joined the board, I was asked to select a committee, and I chose the Speakers Committee, thinking maybe I can make a contribution there. Not realizing the ride that I was about to take, but more importantly, not realizing that I would be reunited with someone who I have looked up to since I was a little girl. I felt like I hit the jackpot when Sandra Wicks Lewis was named as a potential honoree. And someone asked, "Do you know her?" And I said, "Do I?" Years of memories flashed through my mind, and I was transported back to that little girl on 12th Street who, like so many little girls in my community, grew up admiring the big girl on Grady Avenue, Sandra Wicks Lewis. Sandra is a woman of many firsts. First to integrate the city schools of Charlottesville as a member of the Charlottesville 12, the first African-American woman to graduate from the College of Arts and Sciences at UVA. She received her MBA from the University of Nevada, worked in the field of financial services at Merrill Lynch as a financial consultant, a fully licensed Series 6 and 7 investment advisor. Too many accomplishments to recognize in the 3 minutes that I'm told I have to introduce her. And for anyone who knows, being a lawyer and being relegated to 3 minutes is a challenge. She personifies a great leader. She is intelligent, not afraid to step out of her comfort zone, treats others with respect, has integrity, humility, is kind, and serves others. Every little girl has someone that she looks up to, someone who is smart, beautiful, engaging, and has this unforgettable presence and impact on your life that even as a little girl you don't fully realize or appreciate. And for me and for so many other little girls and boys in our community, that person was Sandra Wicks Lewis. Sandra's mother, Mrs. Elizabeth Wicks, was a well-known beautician, was my first stylist, a loving, protective mother, and I'm sure Sandra's first example of a strong woman. I was always excited when Sandra came into the basement of her mother's hair salon after school. I thought royalty had entered the room. She had this big, infectious smile and laugh that she still does, by the way. And I vividly remember her always engaging, always asking me how I was doing. And I thought, she cares about little old me? She would often walk me across Grady Avenue to make sure that I got across the street safely after getting my hair done. Through the years, I would hear about her many accomplishments, and I was so very proud of her and still am. She has inspired me and so many others through her example to do our best with grace, dignity, humility, poise, and always with a smile. She's been a true trailblazer, starting at those very steps of Venable Elementary School through all the years. And although Venable, I lived on 12th Street, Sandra lived on Grady Avenue. Venable was a stone's throw away, but during segregated times, it seemed light years away for us. It was an unfamiliar place, void of familiar faces of family, friends, teachers, ministers, and the community of people who loved and nurtured us. It was a scary, uncertain time. I know it was for me. Sandra probably has and had no idea of the profound effect that she had on so many in our community, walking bravely up those steps of Venable Elementary School with her mother by her side, confidence, and perhaps a bit unfazed. So when it was my turn to walk those same steps, not knowing what to expect, not knowing what was behind those scary doors, I knew, as did other little boys and girls like me, that if Sandra did it, we could do it. I knew that if she was the first to open doors, to break down barriers, and to influence others, we could also do it. So I stand here now, reunited with her, which has been so much fun for the two of us, privileged to introduce her, I am honored, immensely blessed, and grateful to both the board, but especially to Sandra Wicks Lewis for all that she has accomplished through her leadership and her example over the years to our community and the many others beyond our community who have been privileged to know her. It is with much gratitude that I introduce Sandra Wicks Lewis. Please give her a very warm Charlottesville welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you, Elva. That was really better than I thought it would be. And thank you to the women of the Emily Corrick Leadership Forum for the honor and privilege of being here today, along with the young women leaders that are also being honored. And I salute the Corrick family, community leaders, and citizens of my hometown, Charlottesville, Virginia. As I was preparing my remarks, I took the opportunity to learn more about Emily Corrick, the beautiful and remarkable woman that started as a room mother and, as we know, progressed from the PTA president to chair of the school board and ultimately became a Virginia state senator. I can imagine that she wanted to be an advocate for her kids attending Venable. But from her actions and my conversations with some who knew her, she also cared about other people's kids. Venable Elementary, now known as Trailblazers, has a unique student population in that it is located close to the university and consequently enrolls many children from UVA faculty and staff, and is also bordered on another side by largely African-American neighborhoods. And during the time that Emily Corrick's children were there were probably a fairly even mixture of Black and white children coming from those neighborhoods, and also differing socioeconomic levels. Emily became a very close friend of Mary Sampson, a Black teacher there. And together, they shared a common interest to make that school work for all of its students. And they were largely successful because that school stands out amongst Charlottesville elementary schools as having high academic rankings and outstanding programs. As I think about entering Venable at age 9, along with the other 11 African-American students entering Venable and Lane, it is gratifying to know that we were a part of one of the greatest paradigm shifts since the Civil War, from racial segregation to desegregation, as it was called in the 50s, not only in Charlottesville, but the state of Virginia and the entire South. Largely because our parents and other members of the African American community decided in 1956, with the first lawsuit, that the existing imbalance of political and economic power and the undemocratic nature of the separation of the races needed to come to an end. This honor that you have so graciously bestowed upon me is as much about my history as my accomplishments. And I would like to recognize those who are here today and who share that history. And if you applaud, I would like for you to wait until after I have read all the names. I believe at a table to my left and in that corner, and you can stand when I call your name, Charles Alexander, also known as the inspirational speaker, Alex Zahn, an author of the children's book, The Skin is Just the Color, was 7 years old when he entered Venable Elementary in the 2nd grade, and his mother, Ellen Taylor, is also here today. And she made the decision to enroll her youngest son and not back down when the schools were closed for his entire 1st grade. We also have Roland and Ronald Woodfalk, who were age 12, entering 7th grade. They were academic achievers and football heroes at Lane High School, taking the school to a state championship for the first time in its history under Coach Tommy Theodos, who insisted they be allowed on the football team. They are now retired, living in Maryland, and after successful careers in business. And we are very fortunate to have Mr. Eugene Williams, a legend in the Charlottesville community and the man I credit with starting the integration movement. He served as president of the NAACP, and he, along with his wife, Lorraine, organized the plaintiffs and brought the first lawsuit against the Charlottesville School Board for not taking steps to integrate its schools in keeping with the 1954 Supreme Court ruling under Brown versus Board of Education. And his daughters, Cheryl and Carol, integrated Johnson Elementary in 1962, and they were recently honored with a marker at the school. And these are my special guests, and please give them a hand. I want to briefly talk about the history associated with the desegregation of the schools in Charlottesville, because it's important to know what the macro environment was that influenced the micro behavior of the African American community. I threw in the terms macro and micro that came intuitively to me because I worked in the investment and banking world, and to operate successfully on behalf of your clients, you needed to respond to US and global economic forces accordingly. Now, I promise that this will not be a lecture on Economics 101, but I would like to give you a brief definition of macro and microeconomics, because these economic terms are analogous to the macro behavior of the Virginia state politicians, including the governor, and the micro behavior of the African American community in Charlottesville. Macroeconomics, according to Investopedia, is a branch of economics that studies how an overall economy, the markets, businesses, consumers, and governments behave. It examines wide phenomena such as inflation, price levels, economic growth, and national income. The operative word here is behave, because such phenomena as described here happens because of the behavior of business, government, and people. And the intention is to benefit our overall economy with growth, full employment, low inflation, and a reasonably good quality of life. Microeconomics is a branch of mainstream economics that studies the behavior of individuals and businesses in making decisions regarding the allocation of scarce resources and the interactions among these individuals and firms. From my perspective, the macroeconomic environment in Virginia in the 50s and 60s were the laws, written and unwritten, that dictated where African Americans could live, the jobs we could have, and the schools we could attend, amongst a slew of other phenomenon. And this was enforced by those who held the political and economic power because they also controlled the financial markets and voting. And in 1958, the governor of Virginia, Governor Almond, along with other politicians and white sympathizers, defied the order by a federal district judge, John Paul, to desegregate the schools by ordering the local school boards to close the affected schools or lose their funding in Charlottesville, as well as Norfolk, Arlington, and Farmville. And the term used to describe this series of actions was appropriately called massive resistance, a term declared by Senator Harry S. Byrd. The schools were reopened in Charlottesville in January 1959 for the white students, and finally opened to all students, black and white, in September later that year. 1,700 students in Charlottesville alone were affected by that closure. 12 were black, and the rest were white. The macro environment of racial segregation and imbalance of power resulted in African Americans making the best use of the resources they had to have a reasonable quality of life. And now I would like to spotlight the micro environment of the black and white community, because this is the community I grew up in and largely shaped my value system and taught me to be resilient in almost any endeavor and tolerant of diversity. There is an African proverb that states that it takes a village to raise a child. The villagers made sure that the children of the village were protected and taught the necessary skills needed for survival. This term was popularized by Hillary Clinton as she advocated on behalf of children with medical and child care social programs, because she said that the parents needed help. She had her detractors who felt that the parents had the responsibility alone. I do feel that parents, whether in a two-parent or single-parent household, are extremely important in the raising of their children. And I could not have had a better set of parents than Robert and Elizabeth Wicks. However, the African American community also played a key role in making me feel secure in the new environment I found myself in, starting in the 4th grade, going through to my junior year in high school, as one of only a few African American kids in the classroom. In the city of Charlottesville proper, there were clear boundaries around the black neighborhoods that did not have any markers or fencing or railroad tracks. You just knew where they were. The street I grew up on, Grady Avenue, had white residents primarily populated by UVA students and fraternity houses on one end, and black residents starting around 14th Street and ending at 10th Street, where Preston Avenue started. A satellite view would show these neighborhoods clearly in the middle of the city and crossed by a grid of streets numbered 1 through 13. And the one street that could be visually described as dissecting down the middle was Main Street, going south to north, from the downtown business district and ending at the architectural magnificence of the University of Virginia. The white neighborhoods bordered this central district, and the homes were considerably larger near the university and the courthouse area. Ironically, by today's standards, you could say that the African American community had some prime real estate. I think that realization came about in the mid-'60s, starting with the demolition of Vinegar Hill. The key places where I spent a lot of my time and interacted with others in the African American community were Burley High School, Washington Park, and Mount Zion Baptist Church. This was my sociological village, and the adults I encountered in these places taught me, disciplined me, mentored me, and overall provided me with a happy childhood. There were role models galore because the Black community had an overarching mission to elevate ourselves educationally and economically. This grew out of a need to make the best of those scarce resources. A lady I knew well and were friends of my parents, was a friend of my parents, was Mrs. Beatrice Folks. She was a sharp businesswoman who owned and ran Carver Inn on Preston Avenue. It was a stately looking hotel with a restaurant and housed her beauty school that trained women, such as my mother, to be beauticians, small business owners, and marketers of their trade. I have a professional photograph of beauticians in their heels, black dresses, pearls, and perfectly coiffed hairdos. They called themselves the Charlottesville Beauticians Club, and they marketed their trade as hairdressers through trade and fashion shows. If you saw the movie Green Book, you may recall that there existed a AAA type of guide created by African Americans consisting of Black-owned hotels, restaurants, private homes, where one could get a meal or an overnight stay without being insulted or refused entry. Carver Inn would have been in that guidebook. Jefferson Elementary and Burley had a cadre of well-educated principals and teachers that were educated at Virginia State College, Hampton Institute, Howard University, and many other historically Black colleges that dotted the state and the South. Many teachers had advanced degrees from Columbia University and Harvard. And I found out later in life that they didn't want to open UVA and other white Virginia colleges with graduate schools to African Americans. Burley High School, which my older brother attended, sent a large percentage of its graduates to historically Black colleges and gave those not attending college training in nursing, agriculture, and the building trades. High school life was filled with sports teams winning state championships, and Burley's band, with its high-stepping and pretty majorettes, was always cheered by the crowds, Black and white, at Charlottesville's annual Dogwood Parade. Elmer Sampson, Burley's highly acclaimed band director, took them to the Cherry Blossom Parade in Washington, D.C. as well. And as a side note, he was the husband of Mary Sampson, the teacher and friend of Emily Corrick. Summer camp for me was Washington Park. I lived a few blocks from the park, which was on Preston Avenue, and I walked there unattended, played all day on the playground, waded in 2 feet of water in the large but shallow pool. Now, my parents were not being neglectful in sending their unaccompanied child to the park because I was always under the watchful eye of the park attendants, who also happened to be their friends and church members. No one would think of harming me under the watchful eye of Miss Snooky, who was all of 5'2" and 100 pounds. I attended Mount Zion Baptist Church, whose members were also family. My pastor, Reverend Alexander Hamilton, participated in the civil rights movement, along with other Black ministers from First Baptist, Zion Union, Ebenezer, and Trinity Episcopal, as well as other smaller Black churches, Black and white. Reverend Hamilton's successor, Reverend Alvin Edwards, picked up the baton continuing with his own community activism, and became Charlottesville's second Black mayor. This was the village that I told you about. That was the micro view of the African American community that lived and worked under the control of the macro environment, but managed to nurture and produce children that later became a large, prominent, educated class that were prepared for the opportunities created by the Civil Rights and Fair Housing Acts of the 60s. There were some in the white community that nurtured and protected me as well. For the record, I was never bullied or jeered by my classmates at Venable. This was as much a new, and for lack of a better word, awkward experience for them as well. I know that some of my Venable classmates are here, and I thank you for being here today. I can't speak for those who attended Lane High School, but it was described as not being a pleasant experience in the first years of integration. One of the white teachers that seemed to especially care about my well-being with his actions and words of encouragement was my gym teacher, Bryant Bibb. I later found myself under his employment as a teenager when I got my first job, and he had become a manager at the phone company. When I showed up for my job interview, he, of course, remembered me, and the rest of the time, we talked about Venable and not very much about my job qualifications. As destiny would have it, many years later, I saw him again when visiting a relative in a nursing home. He came up to me and greeted me by name, and we again talked. I read with dismay that his obituary a month later. I have come to realize that if I had to do it all over again, I would still have chosen to grow up in Charlottesville in the 50s and 60s, in spite of segregation and massive resistance, because we did, after all, overcome. My hope today is that Charlottesville embraces the village concept that I knew. Children, more than ever, need security and protection, role models and mentors, affordable quality housing, and not good, but great educations, starting in early childhood. I'm pleased to see that Washington Park is still there, and I think they have a real pool now. And according to the city website, it is the most visited park of all the parks in the city. Don't underestimate the value of a resource such as this, where children can play games and sports and have real social interactions with the oversight of caring and trained staff. A community agency that I have a relationship here in Charlottesville is the Charlottesville Area Community Foundation. And I highly commend their work in housing scholarship and donor funds, providing millions of dollars in grants to nonprofit organizations in Charlottesville and surrounding counties. The Charlottesville 12 Scholarship Fund and the Robert and Elizabeth Wicks Fund are housed there. We mainly receive scholarship applications from inner city youth attending Charlottesville High, and most are first-generation college-bound students. And we have awarded scholarships to students from immigrant communities. A college education is life-changing, and as far as I'm concerned, the new civil right for any child who has worked hard to be accepted to college and can do so without the burden of massive student loans upon graduating. Every city I've lived in usually has a Boys and Girls Club. This is a type of organization that would receive a grant from the Robert and Elizabeth Wicks Fund, another Washington Park, you might say, where kids can go and be safe and have wholesome activities and mentoring. My father was a baseball team coach for the Jackie Robinson Little League. During the summer, he would get off from work and take me, his biggest fan, with him to the baseball field at Burley. This was also a time to talk about grades and how things were going at home. The centrally located real estate that I described to you earlier has largely been replaced by hotels, restaurants, and shops to accommodate the university and the business community. And the remaining homes are no longer affordable to the type of homeowner that used to live there. Look, it's great that Charlottesville is often found on a list of best places to live. I understand that after 60 years, the urban landscape should not remain stagnant and segregated. But don't you think citizens of all income levels should be able to have reasonably priced homes near where they work as teachers, firemen, police officers, nurses, and service workers for the university and tourist industry? And I recently learned and commend the Charlottesville City Council that recently committed millions of dollars to address this issue with affordable housing. But I also think the private sector in Charlottesville and Albemarle County should also make this a priority to make sure this area is truly livable for all of its citizens. This too supports parents and children. UVA President Jim Ryan recently completed his strategic plan, and in his words, he strives to make the universe a university that is great and good. And as an alumnus, I am heartened by that expression and its implications for the university in Charlottesville. In 2020, the University Equity Center was created to foster better communication and collaborations between the university and Charlottesville's African American community. And the director, I am proud to say, is a Charlottesville native, Dr. Ben Allen, holding 4 degrees from UVA, and grandson of my former neighbor and friend, Ernest Allen. One of its programs, Star Hill Pathways, seeks to mentor and prepare children from Charlottesville and Albemarle County schools beginning in junior high to be able to enter the university or any other college of their choice after high school. They had their inaugural session in the summer of 2022 with 97 eager and excited participants who descended upon the university grounds and had a science fair in the rotunda where they had never been. The scholarship nominees here today, whom I had an opportunity to meet via a Zoom call, are an impressive and warm group of young women, and they are very sure about their majors and their plans for the future. And your parents, you should be proud of these girls. And they all seem to want to add value to society, both in their careers and community involvement. I asked them, what did they like about Charlottesville? And their responses all had the same theme. Charlottesville is like a small town with lots of activities where everybody knows everybody, and people come together when needed. Sounds like my village. Thank you.